Hi everyone, welcome to module number 5, Humanistic, Existential, and Positive Psychology, Theories of Personality. So let me share my screen. Okay, and I'm gonna extend this and begin the slideshow. Okay, so this is our second clinical kind of cluster of theories we're going to talk about. So they kind of work hand in hand together. Originally, they were separate theories, but as times has passed on, we kind of connect them and cluster them together, kind of like the psychodynamics. So before we begin, we're going to start something different today, because really these concepts are going to be really simple to understand, but it's all kind of about our personal experiences. So I kind of want to start with an activity that will lay in the groundwork to kind of apply this information a little better. So with that being said, I want you to think about someone who made a positive difference in your life. Okay, have that person in mind. Now, how did they make a difference? What did they do? Now I kind of want you to focus on the person in general. Was there certain qualities or characteristics that this person have that made them helpful? What made them a good helper for you? What was your experience interacting with this person? In essence, how did they make you feel? Think about too, were they directive? Did they tell you what to do? Were they non-directive, really put you in the position of authority? Or were they collaborative, where you and them worked together to kind of be helpful? So have that person in mind. And as we're going to continue with this slide, or excuse me, these slides, we have to understand that from these models, our personality is developed through supportive relationships, people who helped us. And so that's really the strong core feeling, especially of humanism, is how do we grow as a person? And we find that supportive relationships are key. So other key tenets is, first, individuals are going to be born with unique potential. So we all have some sort of potential growth within us. Our personalities are not fixed, means they're not static, and then our personalities are going to change and develop, again, with the right supportive relationships. So in that too, we're going to step away from parts, especially in psychodynamics. We're going to try to step away from traits, and we're going to step away from biology and really view individuals as a holistic view instead of fragmented parts. So again, we're seeing the whole person. No doubt traits, parts, and even biological elements are there, but we want to see the giant picture rather than fragments of our personality. In addition to that, just like in psychodynamics, we're driven for something. In these theories, humans are motivated to seek and make meaning in their lives. So our personal purpose is really important in how our personality is expressed and how it grows and develops. So again, growth, our personality is going to grow over time when we are exposed to the right supporting environment. That's a key to humanistic philosophy, especially when it comes to personality. From an existential lens, we all have a personhood that is motivated to kind of deal with the issues of freedom, choice, and responsibility. And if we explore those sometimes uncomfortable areas, that allows us to grow. And again, we're going to focus on the human potential instead of limitations. We're going to focus on the strengths rather than the weaknesses. And that's kind of the positive psychology trend compared to where definitely psychodynamics has a more pathological element. We focus on the weaknesses, but here we're going to start with the strengths. Okay, so here we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this kind of connects with these theories of personality, because from order for personality to grow, we need to have our basic needs met, right? So we need our physiological needs. We need shelter, we need food, we need fire, warmth, clothing, we need safety needs, we need to feel some personal security. And then as we have those foundations, then these models of personality growth can be utilized. So that love and belonging is those supportive relationships. If we have a sense of love and belonging, that's going to allow us to increase our sense of personal esteem, our personal sense of self, our sense of worth is going to increase. And if our sense of worth increases, then we can reach our potential, also known as self-actualization. So it's kind of, you may see already that there are some psychodynamic tinges between humanistic, especially when we compare Jungian. Self-actualization and individuation has a similar process. Again, from a Jungian view, individuation is the integration of the many fragmented parts, creating that whole. We also have this element that's very pro-social. We need supportive relationships. We need love and belonging. Again, kind of similar to Adlerian social interests. I'll expand more about that in the next few slides. So really, this is key to remember, the hierarchy of needs, that in order for ourselves to self-actualize, we need those other areas to have foundation and grow upon. So humanistic therapy, or theories of personality, I'm going to kind of use these words interchangeable, is really uses this metaphor of law of plants growing. So with that, growth happens with the right conditions. So that's key. Our personality is going to grow when the basic needs are met and we're in a loving and belonging, supportive environment. So think of kind of a tree growing, right? So we have the seed or the acorn, and depending on the environment that acorn is going to be in, dictates whether or not that acorn is going to grow into a tree. So inherently in that acorn has the potential to become that giant tree in this photo. But what's going to determine that is we need the right soil, we need adequate sunlight, we need water, etc. So inherently in that shell, the tree exists, but it's only going to be expressed when the right conditions are in it. So like if we put that acorn on a piece of concrete and never water it, never get adequate sun, never get the adequate support, it's not going to grow into that tree. But always remember that acorn has the potential to become that massive tree. So kind of continuing off these ideas, again, compared to psychodynamics, humanistic theories have a very positive view of human nature, that given the right circumstances, someone's going to reach their potential, right? And when they're reaching their potential, this theory believes that they're going to be a pro-social being. So humans were going to be born with a natural kind of drive to reach that potential. And in this model, we call that self-actualizing tendency. So it is some sort of innate desire and motivation that is striving us to become a whole, self-confident, and self-determining individual. So when someone reaches that, essentially their external behaviors and their internal world is kind of aligned together. So when they're aligned together, when our behaviors, emotions, and thought align, we call that congruence. When we don't have those things aligned, we call that incongruence, which I'm going to talk about in a few slides. So again, we are born with the potential and motivated to accomplish that potential of reaching our full potential, okay? So in order to get there though, just like the acorn and the seed is motivated to become the tree, we have to rely on the environment we're in. So we need supportive conditions in order to reach that potential. And one of the major conditions is believed the importance of supportive interpersonal relationships. So this model, again, really comes from the clinical field, where personality growth and change from a clinical lens is greatly connected to the strength of the interpersonal relationship or therapeutic relationship between the client and the therapist. If that relationship is strong, that will increase the positive outcomes of therapy. If we do not have those right conditions, then what can form is this kind of rift between the congruence of our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And what happens is we kind of split between the real self, our potential, and this ideal self of what we think we should be. So rather relying on what we are, we develop this thing of this ideal of what we should be. And we call that an incongruent state because they're kind of divergent, which can cause a lot of stress, fatigue, just feeling stuck. So social expectations, experiences, and unsupportive relationships are going to derail that congruence, is what causes that split. Okay, so to kind of build more onto this ideal versus real self, and this again is kind of showing how our personality is greatly influenced by supportive or unsupportive situations. So again, if we're in a supportive environment that allows us for the self-actualizing to be expressed, then the real self is going to be present. So if everything's aligned, our external behaviors, our thoughts, our emotions in the moment, if they're all connected, then our real self is being expressed. And in that moment, humans are going to feel like they have value and worth, inherent value and worth. Okay? So the real self is being activated when we feel like just being alive, we have value and worth. Okay? So when we feel that, that's when the real self is being activated. The ideal self is activated when we don't feel like we're worthy. So if we're not feeling like we're worthy inherently, then we're going to strive for conditional value and worth. So what I mean by conditions is that in order for me to feel worthy, I must do this. I must do blank. In order for me to feel worthy, I must be successful. I must be popular. I must be intelligent. I must make a lot of money, whatever it is. So those are external to us, and there are conditions with that. So income, degrees, peers, love from certain people. I only feel worthy if I get those conditions. So when we are strived or motivated by those external conditions, when the ideal self is stronger than our real self, that can lead to feelings of discomfort, disconnection, and distorted perceptions, whether that be defenses from a psychodynamic lens or cognitive distortions are occurring. And when we're in our ideal self, we're not allowing our personality to grow and develop. Our personality may become stagnant, and we may constantly be expressing the same traits or behaviors because we're doing that because we have to feel worthy, because we don't feel worthy on the inside. Okay, so how we can feel worthy is this idea of giving supportive environments. Again, going back to that first slide, when I had you reflect on the helper. Helpers can be helpful by giving a supportive environment. So if someone is given a supportive environment and they connect with that real self, where they're going to feel a sense of worth and have value, what we see is there's certain outcomes from that experience. The outcomes are going to be openness to the here and now, so someone being in the moment, so they're not focused on the past or the present, or excuse me, they're not focused on the past or the future, and they're not focused on getting their worth externally, so rather they're focused internally on the here and now. They have some sort of self-direction, personal responsibility, and self-trust. They have a path that they feel they're going on. They feel like they can accomplish that path or be responsible for that path. And if any barriers in the way, they feel like they can trust themselves enough to find a way to overcome them. So also what we'll see is traits of self-exploration, wanting to explore the internal world, wanting to explore really how they relate to others, and really their sense and how they're connected to the greater world as a whole. There's acceptance for the moment, acceptance what they can and can't control, and there's also going to be the sense of authenticity or genuineness, because again, from a real self perspective, if we've reached our self-actualizing tendency, then our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors are going to align. Our external and internal worlds align, which means that we are authentic. So you have a good idea of what I'm genuinely experiencing. I'm not trying to hide anything. I'm not trying to distort anything. I am here right now and you're experiencing my wholeness. And again, because if I feel I have self-value and self-worth inherently as being human, then I'm more likely to see that in other individuals too. That I see their wholeness, I see their humanness, and that's going to promote pro-social behaviors, similar to social interest, where I'm aligned with my sense of self with others. So again, where this all comes from is kind of the humanistic wave of clinical psychology, counseling psychology, and personality development starting in the late 40s and really flourishing all the way up to the 1970s. A big pioneer of this was a man named Carl Rogers. So a good way to kind of think of Carl Rogers is think of Mr. Rogers as well. Mr. Rogers and Carl Rogers have a very similar philosophy where they both feel that how people grow is by a supportive, loving, caring environment. So again, this is a clinical theory. So what you'll hear is not only humanistic, but you also may hear this be referred to as person-centered, client-centered, or Rogerian models of clinical theory, again, which all focus on how personality grows and develops. So a lot of this is going to sound very new age, hippie-ish or esoteric, but really it's important to remember this is one of the first major evidence-based practices of therapy. So again, psychodynamics has a big critique where there hasn't been a lot of empirical data or rigorous laboratory studies of those models, especially in a clinical lens. Here, though, we have kind of the opposite. From the get-go, these models were designed using research means to study the effectiveness. So this was the first approach to systematically study the effects of the counseling relationship using surveys, recordings, and outcome measures. There are numerous videos of Carl Rogers engaging in therapy sessions with clients. So there's the Gloria tapes, there's the Gloria tapes 2. There's, if you go to Saybrook University's YouTube channel, there are numerous videos of Carl Rogers working with various different clients using this model. Again, he recorded sessions, either tape recorder, they did outcome measures. This is a highly studied theory. In addition to that, now, in the 21st century, almost every major model of therapy will argue or integrate these ideas. So even your more kind of psychodynamic or cognitive behavioral therapy or DBT, it is almost standard of practice that we integrate these foundations of a supportive relationship. Again, a therapeutic relationship is important because the best outcome measure so far is establishment of these humanistic principles. If we have these foundations of someone feeling supportive and that we can help them, then we can use other modalities or personality theories after that. But again, I really want to iterate, this is a strong evidence-based theory. So another point I want to add is these models are going to seem simplistic. I mean, that's a big kind of element of them, but they're not easy. So especially from a clinical standpoint is most therapists learn these models, but it's very difficult to apply them. They're hard because you have to see the whole person. You have to model this idea of being congruent. You have to, no matter what this person does, you have to give them unconditional worth and value. And that can be difficult sometimes. This therapy can be really draining. Okay, so With all the evidence I talked about, here's the 3 core conditions for establishing a therapeutic relationship, i.e., a supportive relationship that will help help someone's personality grow and develop. So the first thing is the helper has to be congruent with the client. So again, congruence is my thoughts, feelings, behaviors align, and I'm reaching my self-actualizing tendency. So that means I'm going to be open in the moment. I'm going to be seeing the whole person as a whole. I feel like I have value and worth, and therefore they have value and worth. And if I have all those elements in play, I'm going to be congruent, which means the client has the permission to be congruent. So with that too, no matter what the client does, I'm going to give them unconditional positive regards. In other words, I want to create an environment where they don't have to feel that they have to be an ideal way. So with that, no matter what they do, I'm still going to have respect, value, and worth for them. There's nothing that they have to do to get that from me. Again, this can be hard, right? Finally, I want to try my best to understand what the person is experiencing. So that's that empathetic understanding. So I'm going to listen and try to understand rather than tell them what to do. So there's a video out there from the 1940s when Carl Roger was first getting into training videos. He famously said that if advice worked, then people probably wouldn't seek out therapists because people every day are bombarded by advice. So that's why he argued what makes therapy work and people grow is not giving advice, but listening and trying to understand them, reflective listening elements of it. So those are the supportive conditions which will allow the self-actualizing tendency to take hold, allow someone to really uh, let their personality grow, to let the acorn grow into the tree. So not only is this model for adults, but we see this model more and more being used with children. For example, Virginia Axline was a major pioneer of using these principles to help children. And there's a form of play therapy called child-centered play therapy. So I'm sure if anyone's had class with Marianne Peabody, she may have mentioned this before, or that this is a very again, strong evidence-based principle that if we use those core conditions with children, it allows them to grow and develop. So we have to understand too that this is going to sound kind of fringe, but for children, play is a strong part of how they express themselves, how their personality develops. So why that is like, as we talked about, as you can see throughout this class, language is really big in personality. Traits are just words. How we express our personality has a strong vocabulary and verbal element of this. So that's because as adults, most of us have the cognitive ability to use those concepts. Children, on the other hand, may not have those cognitive facilities, but how they do express themselves and explore the world is through play. So that's why play is really important developmentally. Again, if you've had any class with Dr. Peabody, I am sure she has mentioned this at some capacity. But that's the element is by using play therapy and the core conditions of humanism, this allows children to grow. Again, there is numerous meta-analysis to show the effectiveness of this approach. So those who are interested in kind of working with children in the future, a great book that really takes his ideas and shows the process of them is Dibs in Search of Self. Some of you may have already read that book. The only caveat I would give is this book was written, I believe, in the 1940s, maybe a little later, but some of these perspectives that Virginia Axline talks about have been tweaked a little in the modern era. And again, another great book is Play Therapy. So now we're moving to existential psychology, which is going to be a little more heady, a little more philosophical, and talks about how really what motivates our personality. Again, we're human, and being human, we have to navigate these major life themes. So these life themes are these questions of what is my purpose in life? Why do we suffer? What is this anxiety I'm feeling? I have to deal with my own mortality. I have to deal that inherently I'm an isolated person. I'm born alone into this world, and I'm most likely going to die alone. And then with that, though, we have the ability to create meaning. Creativity is a massive element of our personality growth as well. And we have to deal with the responsibility that from this model, life has no distinct meaning for all of us. We have to create our own purpose, our own meaning. We have to find some sort of answer to all these deep philosophical questions that stem from being human. It is our responsibility to explore those things that are uncomfortable to explore. So again, we need to understand from this element of the slides that there is a distinction between existentialism, the philosophy that has Albert Camus, Sartre, Kierkegaard, that there's a distinction between those philosophers and existential therapy. Existentialism is a 19th century movement that grew and developed in the 20th century philosophical system to kind of explore just how humans are. And existential psychology was no doubt inspired by that, and then applied many of those concepts into clinical and research disciplines. So, those who are interested more, Rollo May was a big pioneer of existential psychology. Irvin Yalom, another massive name. If any of you ever go on to clinical programs in graduate school, I guarantee you're going to read some Yalom. Yalom has numerous books out there that I would recommend as well. And then finally, my favorite, who doesn't get a lot of love, is James Bugenthal. James Bugenthal is a very the, the theorist that combined a lot of Rogerian ideas into existentialism. So the goal of both of these approaches is to connect with our aliveness, what it means to be alive in our humanness, because there's a lot of elements that are uncomfortable with being alive, that are uncomfortable with being human. But again, kind of like a psychodynamic view, if we address all of those areas, we become a more integrated person. So the big key with that, and some of you have alluded to this when you in some of your reflections, especially trying to label 5 traits for yourself. Some of you wrote about this conflict of felt divided on wanting to feel like either label only positive or label negative, but there was some sort of kind of conflict that come up with this. And existentialism is all about this kind of existential dread or anxiety that just being alive, there is an uncomfortableness to it. And many of us tend to avoid that. So we tend to really kind of shut off a major part of who we really are. And from that perspective, we call that unauthentic living, because you're removing a major part of your personality, kind of like a Jungian shadow or repressing something. So the thing is, from an existential psychology element, in order for our personality to grow and develop, we need to understand that we have the choice and responsibility in the development of our own personality. So no doubt at times existential psychology can sound very like, hey, grab your bootstrap kind of mentality of like just suck it up kind of element, and no doubt it has that. But it's this idea that if you want your personality to change, you have the ability to do that is by stepping into the uncomfortableness. So again, anxiety, dread, fear, those are important elements, and if we can kind of address those elements, That's where creativity and personal growth develop. And the other thing I want to say is, from an existential view, anxiety, dread, fear, those uncomfortable feelings we have are not seen as pathological. They seem to have a purpose. They exist for a reason. So, from these views, whatever emotion you feel, there is a reason why you're feeling that way. And rather suppressing that feeling, allowing that feeling to be expressed will create new meaning and some sort of action for that. So, for example, real quickly, we feel sad because something has been lost to us. So that's the feeling, and we need to deal with that. We feel anger because some boundary, some line has been crossed, and we want to reestablish that boundary. So, with this, we are responsible for developing the higher degrees of meaning and well being in our lives. So, not only are we developing our personality, but there's a creative element too, and this more feeling of purpose is highly important for the growth and development of who we are. So, the final slide is positive psychology. And again, this movement in psychology is connected to what we were talking about because for a long time, especially in Western psychology, there's been a lot of what we call pathologizing, which means we focus on limitations, we focus on parts or traits. And positive psychology, again, this movement that wants to focus on wellness. So, what does it mean to be well? How do people, how are people resilient? How do people overcome barriers? What strengths are they utilizing? So again, it's going to focus on strengths of the personality rather than weakness of limitations. It focuses on understanding what provides someone meaning and purpose in individual lives. So we want to understand, have that empathy for understanding what motivates someone. It has an optimistic view that human beings have the potential to grow. And then barriers, again, any kind of thing, something that gets in our way, always provides an opportunity for growth and development. So when we overcome those barriers in life, we gain new meaning. Again, remember from a Jungian standpoint, personality development is all about a spiral. We kind of have a similar element here as well. So if I had to give a quick synopsis in almost a maybe too simplified version, is that these theories view humans have a positive potential. We just have to give someone the right environments. And then rather than focusing on someone's negatives or parts or traits, we see the strengths and we see someone as a whole. And that allows a person to grow and develop. All right. So I believe that's the last slide. Yep. So we'll end there today. Sorry about all that. All right, let's see. I'm going to stop. Okay. So we'll stop there. Have a good rest of your day.